Some choices don't just change your immediate future, they shatter every single belief you ever had about the people who raised you. It was an unseasonably warm Saturday afternoon in early September. Sunlight streamed through the tall bay windows of my parents' living room, casting soft golden patches across the warm hardwood floors. The house smelled faintly of cinnamon and roasted coffee, a familiar, comforting scent that had anchored my entire childhood. I had driven 2 hours from my modest off-campus rental apartment, my heart fluttering with anticipation, carrying a heavy folder inside my leather backpack. I was 22 years old, and for 4 long, grueling years, I had sacrificed everything for a single goal, gaining admission to the biomedical engineering master's program at Stanford University. I wasn't born a genius. Everything I achieved came from sheer, unyielding effort. While other teenagers went to high school parties, went on summer trips, or spent weekends playing video games, I was sitting under the yellow light of my desk lamp, studying advanced calculus, organic chemistry, and cellular mechanics. I worked 30 hours a week as a peer tutor at the university library, skipping meals to save on living expenses, maintaining an immaculate 3.98 GPA. My dream was to invent affordable, low-cost bio-prosthetics for amputees. My maternal grandfather had lost his left leg in an industrial factory accident when I was 7, and watching him struggle with bulky, unaffordable prosthetics had sparked a fire in my soul that never went out. 4 days before that Saturday, the acceptance email from Stanford had finally arrived. Not only was I accepted into their top-tier program, but because of my academic track record, I had been offered a placement under the prestigious Department of Innovation. The tuition, housing, and lab access fees totaled $92,000 for the full program, but I wasn't worried. When I was 8 years old, my paternal grandmother passed away, leaving behind a modest piece of coastal land. My parents sold the land and placed $80,000 into a dedicated high-yield custodial trust fund registered under my name and my father's name as co-signers. The clear, legal premise established by my grandmother's last will was absolute. The trust was earmarked exclusively for my higher education upon my graduation from my undergraduate program. For 14 years, that $80,000 sat untouched, accumulating interest. It was my safety net. It was my key to Stanford. I walked into the living room, a beaming smile across my face. My father, Arthur, sat in his usual leather armchair, sipping tea while reading the weekend business journal. My mother, Clara, was arranging a bouquet of fresh white roses on the coffee table. Sitting on the velvet sofa across from them was my 24-year-old brother, Brandon, along with his fiancée, Chloe. "Hey everyone," I said, setting my backpack down on the dining chair. "I have news. The final admissions board at Stanford sent the official acceptance packet. I need Dad's signature on the fund release form to wire the tuition deposit before the October 1st deadline." I pulled out the crisp white document folder, stepping toward my father with the paper held out. My father didn't reach for the folder. He slowly lowered his newspaper, set his glass of tea on the side table, and looked at my mother. A heavy, uncomfortable silence suddenly descended upon the room. The cheerful atmosphere vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, suffocating tension. My mother stopped adjusting the roses. She wiped her hands on a silk napkin, stood up, and looked at me with a soft, patronizing expression that instantly made my stomach churn. "David," my mother began, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "Sit down, sweetie. We need to have a serious family discussion." "A discussion about what?" I asked, my hand remaining frozen in mid-air, holding the folder. "It's just the standard bank release form for the trust account. The bank officer said all Dad needs to do is sign Section B, and the wire transfer goes directly to the university bursar's office." Brandon shifted uncomfortably on the couch. Chloe, his fiancée, smirked slightly, taking a deliberate sip from her porcelain teacup while stroking her diamond engagement ring. A ring that looked far too expensive for someone with a part-time retail job. My father cleared his throat, leaning forward and resting his elbows on his knees. He looked me dead in the eye, his expression flat, uncompromising, and stripped of any paternal tenderness. "The money isn't there anymore, David," my father said plainly. The room seemed to tilt. The ambient sounds of the neighborhood outside, birds chirping, cars driving past, faded into a loud, metallic ringing in my ears. "What do you mean it's not there?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "It's a protected trust account. It requires both signatures for any non-educational withdrawal." "What did you do, Dad?" My mother stepped forward, placing a hand on my arm, but I violently yanked my arm away from her touch. "David, Don't speak to your father like that. Clara snapped, her gentle facade slipping into sharp irritation. We had to make a decision as a family. Brandon is 24 years old. He is getting married in November. Chloe's family comes from a very high-class social circle, and a wedding sets the stage for a young man's entire future. I stared at my mother in utter disbelief. A wedding? You took $80,000 meant for my education to pay for a wedding. It's not just a wedding. Brandon chimed in defensively, jumping up from the couch with his hands in his pockets. It's a destination wedding in Amalfi, Italy, plus the catering, the luxury venue deposit, and the down payment on our new luxury condo lease. Do you have any idea how important presentation is in Chloe's family? Her father is a senior regional director at a commercial real estate firm. If I look poor, I ruin my chances of ever getting a job at his company. You sacrificed my entire life, my future, my master's degree, for a 3-day party in Italy. I screamed, the raw panic and anger bursting out of my chest. That money was left to me by Grandma. Her will explicitly stated it was for my college fund. My father slammed his hand down onto the wooden arm of his chair, the loud crack echoing through the house. That is enough, David, Arthur barked, standing up to his full height. You are being selfish, arrogant, and ungrateful. You have always been the smart one. You get straight A's without even trying. You can just get a student loan, or work a night shift, or wait a few years. Yuck! Brandon doesn't have your academic gifts. He needs this boost to establish his life. I stood frozen, staring at my father. You're smart enough to work. The words hung in the air like a poisoned dagger, plunging deep into my heart. All those years of relentless sacrifice, sleepless nights, skipping meals, and driving myself to the brink of physical exhaustion, were now being used as a weapon against me. Because I worked hard, I was expected to shoulder the burden. Because my brother was lazy, entitled, and reckless, he was rewarded with my life savings. I turned my gaze toward Brandon. He wasn't crying. He wasn't showing a single drop of remorse. He stood there beside his fiancée, looking at me with a subtle, arrogant smirk that declared I won, and there is nothing you can do about it. The drive back to my rental apartment that evening was a blur of pouring rain, flashing red taillights, and blinding tears. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my fingers went completely numb. Every memory of my childhood flashed through my mind, each one laying bare the toxic truth I had spent 2 decades trying to deny. Brandon had always been the golden child of the family. From the day he was born, my parents treated him like royalty. When Brandon got a C in high school, my parents bought him a brand new mountain bike to encourage his self-esteem. When I earned a 100% on my state science examination, my mother simply glanced at the paper, nodded, and asked why I hadn't swept the garage yet. When Brandon wrecked his first car at 18 while driving recklessly with his friends, my father quietly paid off the damages and bought him a late-model sedan the following week. When I turned 18, my father handed me a bus pass and told me that a young man needed to learn the dignity of independence. I had spent my entire life trying to earn my parents' approval through perfection. I thought that if I worked hard enough, if I achieved enough, if I made them proud enough, they would finally look at me with the same love and adoration they showered upon Brandon. Now, staring down the barrel of a destroyed future, the brutal reality was staring right back at me. I was never a son to them. I was merely a resource to be harvested whenever their golden child needed a bailout. When I arrived at my small apartment, I sat down on the floor of my tiny kitchen, my back pressed against the cold cabinets, staring at the empty wall. My phone rang. It was my mother. I picked it up, my voice flat, hollow, and devoid of emotion. Hello, David. Clara's voice sounded irritated, stripped of any maternal sweetness. I hope you've stopped throwing your dramatic temper tantrum. Your father and I are extremely disappointed in your behavior today. You humiliated us in front of Chloe. Mom, I whispered softly. I worked 4 years for Stanford. The tuition deposit is due in 3 weeks. Without that trust money, I lose my admission spot. Do you understand what you've done to me? Oh, stop being so dramatic. Clara snapped, exasperated. Stanford will always be there. You can apply again in 3 or 4 years after you work and save up some money. But Brandon's wedding is happening now. A man only gets married once, David. How can you be so cold-hearted and jealous of your own brother's happiness? Jealous? I let out a dry, bitter laugh that sounded broken even to my own ears. He stole $80,000 left to me by my grandmother. That is not happiness, Mom. That is theft. That money was in a joint account managed by your father, my mother yelled, her tone hardening into stone. We brought you into this world, David. We fed you, clothed you, and put a roof over your head. Everything you have is because of us. You owe your family. Now, I am telling you this right now, Brandon's wedding is on November 15th. You will put on a tuxedo, you will attend the ceremony, and you will act like a supportive brother. If you cause a scene or make Chloe's family uncomfortable, your father and I will disown you completely. Before I could answer, she slammed the phone down, ending the call. I sat in the dark kitchen for a long, quiet hour. The silence in the room was deafening. I picked up the formal acceptance letter from Stanford University that was sitting on my table. My fingers traced the raised gold crest at the top of the paper. I knew that if I called the university admissions office and explained that my parents had liquidated my college fund, they would offer sympathy, but sympathy wouldn't pay the $80,000 bursar fee. I couldn't take out an unsecured student loan of that magnitude without a co-signer, and my father would never co-sign a loan for me now. I stood up, walked over to my desk, and opened my laptop. I pulled up the digital banking portal for the custodial trust fund. My father had used his co-signer status to execute an administrative override, transferring the entire $80,000 balance into a newly created joint checking account registered under his name and Brandon's name. The transaction description read, Abu Adidiol Gianan, Seditiol Kato Expendiur. They hadn't even tried to cover their tracks. They genuinely believed that because they were my parents, they were immune to consequences. They believed that my quiet, dutiful nature meant I would swallow this bitter pill, cry in private, go to work, and stay silent to protect the family image. I closed my laptop. The sadness inside me didn't turn into weeping. It condensed into something hard, sharp, and absolute. They thought I was smart enough to work. What they failed to realize was that the exact same intellect, discipline, and meticulous attention to detail I used to solve complex bio-engineering equations could easily be redirected toward destroying every single person who thought they could ruin my life and walk away laughing. I pulled out a fresh notebook, uncapped a black pen, and wrote a single line at the top of the page. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in silent, methodical investigation. I didn't call my parents back. I didn't text Brandon. When my mother sent routine group text messages about tuxedos, flower arrangements, and flight itineraries to Italy, polite, one-word answers. Okay? Got it? My family assumed I had submitted to their authority. They thought I was coming to my senses and accepting my role as the sacrificial lamb. In reality, I was spending every night after my work shifts sitting in the Central University Law Library, consulting with third-year financial law students, reviewing custodial trust statutes, and pulling public records. My first breakthrough came when I examined the original legal documentation of my grandmother's trust fund. When my grandmother, Eleanor Cross, established the $80,000 trust in 2010, she utilized an irrevocable uniform transfers to Minors Act UTMAV structure. Under state law, an UTMA account legally transfers ownership of the capital to the minor beneficiary the moment the funds are deposited. The adult co-signer, in this case my father, Arthur Cross, holds a purely fiduciary role. He is legally classified as a custodian, not an owner. Every single dollar in an UTMA trust legally belonged to me from the day I turned 18. By withdrawing that money and transferring it into Brandon's personal checking account for non-fiduciary, non-educational personal expenditures, my father hadn't just made an ethical family decision. He had committed Class 2 felony embezzlement of custodial funds and breach of fiduciary duty under state banking laws. I took the complete paper trail. The original UTMA trust agreement, my grandmother's certified will, bank statements showing the exact date of the unauthorized, the $80,000 transfer, and the wedding transaction receipts, to a senior consumer fraud attorney named Raymond Vance. Raymond Vance was an aggressive, razor-sharp attorney who specialized in trust fraud and elder financial abuse. He sat behind his heavy mahogany desk, wearing a tailored navy suit, reviewing my documents line by line with a magnifying glass. "This is an open and shut case of custodial conversion, David," Vance said, setting the papers down and looking at me over his silver-framed glasses. "Your father had zero legal authority to touch that capital for a third-party wedding. Furthermore, because your brother, Brandon, was a willing co-recipient of the stolen funds and used them for personal luxury purchases, he is legally classified as an active accomplice to trust conversion." "What are the legal remedies, Mr. Vance?" I asked, my voice calm, steady, and entirely devoid of emotion. We can file a civil lawsuit for immediate restitution, freezing all accounts associated with your father and brother, Vance explained. In addition, we can submit a formal criminal complaint to the State Attorney General's Financial Crimes Division. Given the dollar amount exceeds $50,000, this carries mandatory prison time for the custodian, along with full asset seizure to satisfy the debt. Vance leaned forward, studying my face. However, once we execute this filing, your father will face felony charges. Your brother's wedding will be immediately halted by bank garnishment orders. Your family dynamic will be utterly destroyed. Are you prepared to go all the way? I sat in silence for a moment, looking at my reflection in the dark glass of his office window. I remembered my father's cold, contemptuous face as he sat in his leather armchair. Whoa, you're a smart inuch to work. I remembered my brother's arrogant smirk as he held his fiancée's hand, boasting about his luxury destination wedding in Amalfi. I remembered my mother telling me to shut up and stop ruining Brandon's special moment. Mr. Vance, I said, looking him dead in the eye. My family destroyed my life 3 weeks ago without blinking an eye. I am not here to ask for an apology. I am here to execute justice. Vance nodded, a dark, professional smile flickering across his face. Understood, son. Now, let's talk about timing. We don't file yet, I said softly, leaning forward. If we file now, my father will take out a high-interest second mortgage on his house, pay back the bank quietly, and cover up the scandal. I want the truth brought out when everyone they care about is watching. Vance raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What do you have in mind? My brother's pre-wedding gala is taking place in 2 weeks, I explained, my voice as cold as ice. It's being hosted at the Grandview Country Club. My mother has invited 200 guests, including Chloe's wealthy family, local business executives, and our entire extended family. She spent $20,000 of my stolen money, just booking the hall to brag about her son's success. I looked at the attorney. I want the civil freeze orders and the federal audit summons served directly into their hands on that stage. In front of every single person whose respect they tried to buy with my future. The 14 days leading up to the Grandview Country Club Gala were an exercise in supreme self-control. To ensure my parents didn't suspect a thing, I played the part of the obedient, defeated son to absolute perfection. When my mother called to ask if I had picked up my groomsman tuxedo, I answered politely, yes, Mom. It's hanging in my closet, fits perfectly. When my father sent a brief text asking if I was still upset, I replied, I understand your perspective now, Dad. See you on Saturday. My father sent back a short response. Good. Glad you grew up. They were so blinded by their own arrogance, so convinced of their complete dominance over me, that they mistook my absolute silence for total submission. They genuinely believed I was coming to the gala to bow my head, smile for the family photos, and play the background character in Brandon's grand fairy tale. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Raymond Vance and his legal team were quietly laying the ultimate trap. Vance filed an emergency ex parte motion with the Superior Court for an immediate asset restraint and accounting order against Arthur Cross and Brandon Cross, because the evidence of trust conversion was undeniable, backed by bank routing numbers, altered signature cards, and UTEMA violation affidavits. The presiding judge granted a secret, preliminary injunction. The court order decreed that effective at 8:00 p.m. on the night of the gala, every joint and individual bank account held by Arthur Cross and Brandon Cross would be frozen pending a full forensic accounting audit. In addition, Vance coordinated with a certified senior process server, a retired state police officer named Lieutenant Thomas, who agreed to deliver the formal court summons, asset restraint notices, and criminal fraud notifications in person. On the morning of the gala, I woke up early. I took my time getting dressed. I put on my tailored black tuxedo, polished my shoes until they shone like mirrors, and carefully combed my hair. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. There was no sadness left in my eyes, no resentment, no hesitation. I was no longer the desperate son begging for a crumb of love from parents who valued me only as a piggy bank. I was the architect of their reckoning. I picked up my briefcase, checked my phone to confirm Lieutenant Thomas and his process-serving team were in position, and drove toward the Grandview Country Club. The autumn sky was clear and bright. The air was crisp. As I turned into the long tree-lined driveway of the country club, I saw dozens of luxury sports cars, limousines, and high-end SUVs parked along the manicured green lawns. Valets in white coats were rushing back and forth opening doors for wealthy guests, dressed in designer gowns and expensive suits. My mother had pulled out all the stops. Huge floral displays lined the marble entrance. A string quartet played classical music near the fountain in the foyer. As I stepped through the grand double glass doors, my mother spotted me immediately. She was wearing a sparkling navy, blue sequined evening gown, dripping in diamond jewelry, holding a crystal glass of expensive champagne. "David," Clara called out, walking over to me with a beaming, triumphant smile. She patted my cheek gently. "Oh, look at you. You look so handsome in your tuxedo. I knew you'd come around. Your father and I are so proud of you for making the mature choice." "Thank you, Mom," I said softly, keeping my face completely expressionless. "Where is Brandon?" "He's in the main ballroom with Chloe and her parents," my mother gushed, grabbing my arm and pulling me through the grand archway. Chloe's father, Richard, was so impressed by Brandon's financial presentation for the wedding venue that he's talking about making Brandon a junior partner at his real estate firm. Isn't that wonderful? I looked across the glittering ballroom. The room was filled with over 150 high society guests. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceilings, reflecting light off silver ice buckets, vintage wine bottles, and elaborate three-tiered displays of caviar and fine pastries. At the head table sat Brandon, looking flushed with wine and self-importance, holding Chloe's hand while talking loudly to her father, Richard, a tall, distinguished man in a dark gray suit. My father, Arthur, stood nearby, laughing boisterously with several local business executives, holding a glass of aged scotch. It was a palace built entirely on stolen money, a grand, glittering lie funded by my destroyed dreams, my stolen trust fund, and 14 years of my grandmother's legacy. I looked at the silver wall clock near the grand stage. It was 7:52 p.m. 8 minutes remained till the kingdom came crashing down. I walked slowly across the polished marble floor toward the head table, taking a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter's tray. When Brandon saw me approach, he stood up, raising his champagne glass high, attracting the attention of the surrounding guests. "Hey everyone! Look who made it!" Brandon shouted loudly, his voice slurred slightly from alcohol. "My little brother, David? The smart guy of the family." A light wave of laughter rippled through the nearby tables. Brandon walked over and clapped his hand heavily onto my shoulder, leaning in close so only I could hear his whisper. "Glad you decided to stop crying and show up, bro. See, I told you everything would work out. You get to enjoy a free steak dinner, and I get an Amalfi wedding. Win-win." I looked at his hand on my shoulder. I didn't push him away, I just smiled. A cold, terrifying smile that made Brandon's laughter falter for a second. "Enjoy the moment, Brandon," I whispered back softly. "You earned every bit of what's coming." But Brandon frowned, confused by my tone. But before he could say anything, my mother stepped onto the elevated wooden stage near the center of the ballroom. She tapped a microphone with her silver ring, her voice echoing brightly across the high-end sound system. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," Clara announced, her face glowing under the stage spotlights. "May I please have everyone's attention?" The chatter in the ballroom died down. Over 150 wealthy guests turned their heads toward the stage, raising their glasses. "Tonight," Clara continued, her voice trembling with theatrical emotion, "we are gathered here at the Grandview Country Club to celebrate the union of my wonderful son, Brandon, and his beautiful fiancée Chloe. As a mother, there is no greater joy than watching your child step into his destiny as a successful, prosperous leader." My father, Arthur, walked up onto the stage beside her, standing tall and proud, putting his arm around her waist. "We want to thank Chloe's wonderful parents, Richard and Eleanor," my father added into the microphone, nodding toward Chloe's family. "And we are proud to announce that through our family's dedicated financial stewardship and investment planning, Brandon and Chloe's destination wedding in Amalfi, Italy, will be fully paid for in cash, including a brand new luxury residence in the city center." Applaud broke out across the room. Chloe's father, Richard, clapped politely, smiling with satisfaction. Brandon beamed with pride, bowing his head slightly toward the crowd, basking in the admiration like a king accepting homage from his subjects. I looked at the wall clock. It was 8:00 p.m. At that exact second, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A single text message appeared on my screen from Lieutenant Thomas. "Target accounts frozen. We are entering the main foyer now." I set my water glass down on a nearby table, pulled my tuxedo jacket straight, and stepped toward the center of the dance floor directly in front of the elevated stage. "Dad," I called out, my voice cutting through the applause with sharp, absolute clarity. Before you finish your speech, there's one small detail about your financial stewardship that you forgot to mention to your guests. The applause faltered. The room quickly quieted down as guests looked at me in surprise. My mother's face instantly darkened into an expression of furious disbelief. David, what are you doing? Shut your mouth and sit down right now. My father glared down at me from the stage, his eyes wide with anger. David, I am warning you. Do not ruin this moment. Step back. I think the guests deserve to know who actually paid for the Amalfi wedding, Dad, I said, stepping closer to the stage, speaking clearly so every microphone picked up my voice. You didn't pay for it with your investment planning. You paid for it by forging documents, violating an UTMA custodial trust, and stealing $80,000 from my Stanford University college fund. Gasps erupted across the ballroom. Chloe's father, Richard, froze. He looked from me to my father, his brow furrowed in sharp shock. Arthur, what is he talking about? He's lying. My mother shrieked into the microphone, her voice breaking into a high-pitched scream. He's mentally unstable. He's jealous of his brother. Security! Get this boy out of here right now. 2 country club security guards stepped toward me from the side doors. But before they could take 2 steps, the grand double doors of the ballroom were slammed wide open. 4 men dressed in dark, formal suits stepped into the ballroom, radiating an unmistakable aura of cold, legal authority. Leading the group was Lieutenant Thomas, carrying a thick leather briefcase stamped with an official state court seal. Flanking him were 2 uniformed state court officers and my attorney, Raymond Vance. The atmosphere in the room transformed instantly. The background classical music cut off as the sound technician frantically muted the audio. The silence in the cavernous ballroom was deafening. Arthur Cross, Brandon Cross. Lieutenant Thomas's booming voice echoed off the high marble ceilings. My father stood frozen on the stage, his hands trembling as he held the microphone. Ooh, who are you? This is a private event. Lieutenant Thomas didn't stop walking until he was standing directly in front of the stage. He pulled out a thick stack of official court documents wrapped in blue legal backing paper. Mr. Cross, Lieutenant Thomas announced loudly, ensuring every single guest in the building heard every word. I am serving you with an immediate court injunction, asset restraint order, an order for forensic accounting issued by the Superior Court under Case File 26 CV 8841. He handed the first blue folder directly to my father on the stage. As of 8:00 p.m. tonight, Thomas continued, every bank account associated with Arthur Cross, Clara Cross, and Brandon Cross has been off SCL frozen by court order due to prima facie evidence of illegal custodial trust conversion, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty involving $80,000 of trust funds belonging to David Cross. A collective gasp echoed through the room like a wave of cold wind. Chloe's mother, Eleanor, gasped loudly, holding her pearls. Chloe's father, Richard, stood up from the head table so fast his chair knocked over backwards onto the floor. Frozen. Brandon screamed, jumping up from his chair, his face turning bright red. What do you mean frozen? My wedding venue deposit is due tomorrow. The flight bookings are processing tonight. Lieutenant Thomas turned toward Brandon, pulling a second blue folder from his briefcase and slapping it directly into Brandon's chest. Brandon Cross, Thomas said coldly. You are named as a primary co-defendant and recipient of stolen custodial capital. Because you converted these funds into personal assets with full knowledge of their origin, you are served with an immediate asset surrender notice. Any credit cards, checks, or transfers issued from those accounts are currently invalid. My mother grabbed the microphone, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold it to her lips. This is a mistake. This is a family matter. David, tell them to stop. Tell them you made a mistake. My attorney, Raymond Vance, stepped forward beside me, adjusting his tie. Cross, Vance said in a calm, lethal voice that carried across the silent room. This is not a family matter. This is a civil and criminal proceeding for felony trust embezzlement under State Code Section 504. If your husband and son attempt to transfer, hide or liquidate any further assets, they will be taken into immediate criminal custody by the officers standing behind me. Chloe's father, Richard, walked up to my father on the stage. His face was dark with pure, unadulterated fury. Arthur, Richard whispered, his voice trembling with rage. Did you fund this wedding with stolen money from your younger son's college fund? Richard, please, let me explain, my father stammered, sweating profusely, his face drained of all color. It was just an internal family loan. We were going to pay David back later. David is smart. He can work. He doesn't need the money right now. Richard stared at my father, as if he were looking at a piece of garbage stuck to the bottom of his shoe. You stole from your own child. Richard said, his voice dripping with utter revulsion. You lied to me. You made me believe your family came from honor and wealth, when in reality you are nothing but common financial criminals. Richard turned toward his daughter, Chloe, who was standing beside the head table, sobbing hysterically in her designer dress. Chloe, Richard commanded, his voice cold as ice. Take off that ring. We are leaving right now? No, please, Chloe wailed, clutching her hand to her chest. Brandon, didn't mean to. I said take off the ring, Richard shouted, grabbing his daughter's arm. I will not allow my family's name to be dragged through the mud with these thieves. Chloe pulled the diamond ring off her finger, threw it onto the marble floor, and ran out of the ballroom sobbing, followed by her furious parents and their high society guests. Within 3 minutes, the grand ballroom, a room that had been filled with over 150 laughing, cheering guests just moments before, was completely empty, save for the scattered champagne glasses, the fallen flower displays, my weeping mother, my ruined brother, my trembling father, and me. The fallout from that Saturday night at the Grandview Country Club was swift, brutal, and absolute. Chloe's family officially canceled the wedding the very next morning. They issued a formal statement to all their social and business networks, severing all ties with the Cross family. Brandon was instantly fired from his job application at Richard's real estate firm, and his name was blacklisted across the regional commercial sector. Without the stolen trust money, and with his personal accounts frozen by the court order, Brandon was forced to default on the luxury condo lease. His sports car was repossessed 3 weeks later, and he was forced to move into a tiny, run-down studio apartment while taking a low-paying job as a night shift delivery driver to pay for his legal defense fees. My father, Arthur, faced the full weight of the legal system. To avoid state prison time for felony custodial embezzlement, my father was forced to execute a formal legal settlement arranged by my attorney, Raymond Vance. My father took out a heavy, high-interest personal loan against his pension fund to fully restore the $80,000 to my account, along with an additional $18,000 to cover statutory interest, legal fees and court costs. Every single cent was wired directly into a new, secure, independent bank account registered exclusively under my name, with 0 co-signers. My mother, Clara, tried to contact me dozens of times over the following months. She left weeping, hysterical voicemails begging me to drop the court enforcement, calling me heartless, telling me that I had destroyed Brandon's life, ruined his marriage, and broken her heart. When I listened to those voicemails, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt a deep, peaceful clarity. I realized that my mother's love had never been real. It was a fake, transactional illusion reserved only for the child who fed her vanity. I blocked her phone number, blocked my father's number, and severed all legal and personal ties with my family permanently. 4 weeks after the gala, I stood on the iconic oval lawn of Stanford University in Palo Alto, California. The autumn sun was warm, shining brightly on the palm trees lining Palm Drive. The crisp air smelled of eucalyptus and fresh pine. I was holding my official student identification card, along with my keys to the graduate research laboratory in the Department of Bioengineering. Because Raymond Vance had secured the full $98,000 restitution settlement before the final university extension deadline, I paid my bursar fees in full. My admission spot was secured. I walked up the stone steps of the research center, carrying my leather backpack, the same backpack I had carried to my parents' house 2 months ago. I stopped at the top of the steps and looked out over the sprawling, beautiful campus. For 22 years, I had believed that family was an unshakable bond that required you to accept abuse, sacrifice your dreams, and allow yourself to be destroyed so that others could shine. I had believed that being dutiful meant staying silent, while the people who were supposed to protect you stole your future right out from under your feet. But true family is not defined by blood. True family is defined by respect, honor, and accountability. If you allow toxic people to burn down your life just to keep themselves warm, you aren't being loyal. You are being an accomplice to your own destruction. Sometimes, the greatest act of self-respect isn't silently enduring injustice in the name of peace. It is standing your ground, turning on the light, and letting the full, unyielding weight of truth destroy the lies that were built to crush you. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the university lab, stepped inside, and began building my future. The end.